for the invite. I really appreciate it. So pleased to meet you all. I'm Martin. I'm the Chief Exec of a company called Projected Success. So I started off in government. I had 20 years in government. I was chartered engineer, project manager, and I've done some big jobs. So I ran the Eurofactor simulator, led research for sort of fast air and stealthy drones and weapons and that sort of stuff. So I did various jobs across government, worked for NATO for a little bit. And I got frustrated that we keep making the same mistakes time after time after time after time. So I thought there's some patterns in those mistakes that we're making. So all this about project failure, we write all these lessons learned reports, but we don't go and harvest them. So I left government and I went to work for Lloyd's Register for a couple of years, doing some nuclear work, and then I worked for another little company, and then I set my own business up in 2014. And I worked at Caution then. So Caution buys a lot of equipment for the MOD, all the satellites, phones, all that sort of stuff, right, computers, etc. And I set up a PMO there. So we won a contract to set up a PMO. And there was, I don't know, 10 billion spend, something like that, with a team of 50 people doing that PMO things. Right? So it's an extended PMO in terms of its scope. I found again, across that portfolio, the same mistakes were coming up time after time after time. So I tried to mine some of that data, and it was really hard to get my hands on it because it was all on laptops and stuck in cupboards and all sorts of things, right? So that was 2014, 15, 16. So in 2017, I thought I'm going to do something about this. So I sold out of another business that I was a shareholder in. So I was 50% shareholder in this other business. And that gave me a bit of cash. And I thought, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? So I've been leading some big jobs. I've led a PMO, etc. And I thought, I want to do something different. I want to try and solve this lessons learned conundrum. So what can we do to leverage all that experience? So I made myself really unpopular, and I put in a load of FOI requests, and I pulled together 20,000 lessons learned. And I thought, from all those lessons learned, I get some secret sauce, and then we'll find out the way to fix projects. And I wasted 6 months of my life doing that, and I burnt my reputation with some organisations as well because they saw me as a terrorist. And for me, it taught me that lessons learned data is not appropriately structured to get value out of it going forward. And if you think like a computer, so you think like a large language model or something, it's just not in the right format to do anything with it. So we're capturing all this experience, but badly. So I thought I'm going to do something about that. So in 2017, I set up the Project Data Analytics community. So I started to run events like this. Pre-pandemic, they were in London. We used to get 100 odd people coming along, all about advanced project data analytics and artificial intelligence. We used to get speakers along, etc. And then in 2020, we set up the Project Data Analytics Task Force. And the principle about the task force was, let's get some people together. We're going to write some documents, and we'll move the dial. So we wrote the Getting Started guide for the APM, getting started in Project Data Analytics. The skills guide came out of that. The Project Data Analytics manifesto came out of that as well. So in 2024, well, 2023, I was invited to go to Belfast by the Infrastructure Projects Authority and by the government heads of profession. So I did one of these talks in the evening after doing the talk for about an hour and a half, where we chewed the cud a bit like this now. Right? And I argued with them, the country is broken, we've got no money left, so it is wrong, it's morally bankrupt. It's doing something like Crossrail, get all the experience about building platforms and integrating train systems and signalling, whatever, and then we start HS2, and we can't take the data from Crossrail and stick it in HS2. That's wrong. And then we've got Transpennine route upgrade, and we've got East West Rail. There's no budget to leverage all that experience. They call it the lessons learned knowledge base that goes with it, like with Olympics, like with Crossrail, but it's these reports that sit on the shelf. But the intrinsic data that goes with it, it's not necessarily about the lessons learned, it's about, so how long did it take you to build that platform? So how much concrete was it? What do you do about the optimization of the formwork? So what do you do about sort of getting the cabling in and et cetera, et cetera? All of that is knowledge that we should be leveraging for the next time we do it. We don't. It all goes in the bin. Right? And that for me felt really bad. So what I then wanted to do was say, right, let's do something about it. So I lobbied government, etc. And a paper came out in March of this year where government have said, so if you Google it, it's Project Data Analytics data strategy for government, right? So it says in there things like we're going to upskill our people, we're going to pool our data and start to leverage that data for the greater good of the profession, etc. So there's 6 principles in there, and that's what that paper says. But our meeting in Belfast was in June of 23, and we're now in December 24, and what their function strategy said in government, and I think that was out in 22-23, that said by 2025, so one of government's strategic objectives, they had 5 strategic objectives for project delivery, and one of them was data-driven performance by 2025. Now 2025 is what? 2.5 weeks away. We're not going to have data-driven project delivery by 2025. So it's like government saying stop the boats, they're not stopping the boats. This is just as bad because we're saying let's get to data-driven project delivery, but we're not getting there.
If I know the government, they'll interpret that as being the 31st of December, not the 1st of January.
Yes. Yeah. So even that, it could take another year if they want, but on sort of the crude value so far, I can't see that being delivered, right? And that upsets me. That upsets me because this is our money. This is about infrastructure that's going to drive economic growth. This is about net zero. This is about all the things that matter to us as a society. And we've got an obligation to do something about it. And we can do something about it if people cared, right? And that's where we want us to be. Let's all care about that exhaust plume that comes out back of a project because it's got intrinsic value, right? So in this year, we've set up something called the Project Data Analytics Coalition. So what the task force does, it writes documentation, it's got a bit of lobbying and influence and stuff like that, but it's volunteers, a bit like with the BCS. So a community of volunteers writing these papers. So what we're trying to do through the coalition, it's a client-led coalition. It's got Rolls-Royce, EDF, United Utilities, Thales, the MOD, and the Environment Agency. And what they've said, let's pool our resources together so we can start to promote this agenda and create some stuff, right? So what Rolls-Royce are doing at the moment, so through one of the projects that one of their apprentices has done, they've created a tool for looking at schedules. So Rolls-Royce developed nuclear reactors for submarines. They've got some monster schedules that go with that. And a schedule has got some data quality that goes with it, right? So it's called the DCMA 14-point assessment, right? An American standard, and says, basically, if you've got a floating task, then you get less score because your task shouldn't just be hanging, it should be connected to something else, right? So a bit like when you write a book has got some certain grammar with it. So you judge the book on the basis of its grammar, but that doesn't make it a bestseller, right? It's the same with a schedule. Just because it's well constructed doesn't mean it's a good schedule, right? So it helps you to understand the grammar of the schedule, the equivalent of. So that tool is normally, there's things like Acumen Fuse, there's various versions of it, and that tool is available for in the region of £1,000 a seat. So what Rolls-Royce have done is they've created something very, very similar, and they're going to open source it for the benefit of everybody. So if we give that away to everybody, that will save us all millions of pounds, right? And that will drive up schedule quality as well, because at the moment, some organisations, they can only afford so many seats. So 5% of the planners might get a copy of this bit of software. We democratise it, everyone gets a copy of the software, right? Which is really cool. So that's the approach we're trying to take. Now, these are some of the contracts which are like metal bashing, right? Submarine reactors, it's more infrastructure, it's not necessarily computers. They've all got control systems that go with it. So when you're building the factory as well, they've got all the IT and they've got all the systems that go with it. And what I challenge this community is, what is IT? Because it goes from IT in terms of on-prem, into cloud, into data engineering, into data science. So you're closer to this world than somebody who works in construction, who's digging holes in the ground, right? You're much closer to this world, so you should be all over this stuff. Your bread and butter, right? So for me, pushing this agenda through the coalition, we are now making a difference. So we run hackathons 3 times a year. So the last one was at Rolls-Royce in Derby. We pulled together about 160 people to solve problems that were shared across the community. And then we open source the products that come out. That inspires people and gets the flywheel going, right? So it's all about the community working together to move the dial on project delivery. How cool is that? So that's a bit of an introduction. So what I also did as well, there's a chap called Andy Murray, I don't know if you know, he works for the Major Projects Association. So not the tennis player, it's the other one. So Andy was the lead author for the latest version of Prince 2. And I worked with Andy, with Axelos, to write a book. It's more of a guide on Prince 2 and artificial intelligence. So if you do the Prince 2 training, I think it comes as a freebie with that pack. So I wrote that as well. I've written some books recently that I've open source, given them away, on next generation risk management and next generation PMO. And I've got one coming out in the new year. So I'm working with Andy on that, on next generation assurance.
Cat Online is just saying, you call it a hackathon, it sounds like it's all about hacking and cyber security, which isn't quite what you meant.
So what we do is we pull a load of people together, right? So these are all random people. We have students, we have project professionals, we have apprentices, we have all sorts of people. So they all come together. So we then pitch at the front. So Rolls-Royce will say, I've got a problem that I want you to work on, which is about my schedules, right? So at the moment, I've got loads of schedules. I want to preempt where is the delay going to come from. So which work packages are more predisposed to variance, right? So that's what we're trying to work out. Then Talis said, we've got a load of risk data. So I've anonymized all the risk data. There's all this risk data here. So can you pick the bones out of that and give me some insights? So Talis said, I'd like some people to work on this. So that takes us from 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock on day one. We do all these pictures and tell them about what the hackathon's all about. And it's chaos, absolute chaos for about 30 minutes. Because everybody's floating about. They don't know each other, right? They're all floating around. They don't know what to work on, whatever. So we've got to try and broker these teams. I don't want a load of project managers in one team, a load of students in another team, a load of data people in another team, because that won't work. You've got to have a blend in the team. So we facilitate all of that. So we have teams of about 6 people who's worked together on these challenges. So they start about 10 o'clock, they start to understand the problem, and then start to get going it. By 5 o'clock the following day, it's finished. They've got to record a video. That gets submitted. We've got panels of judges who go through all the videos, score them, and then the winning team gets 3 grand, second place gets 750, 250, something like that, right? So it's £5,000 prize fund up for grabs. So basically, it's bringing project people together with data people to solve some really cool problems.
And these are real problems. These aren't hypothetical.
These are real problems with real data. Now, some of the data, really sensitive data, so we've had to put it through data pipelines to anonymize it and clean up a bit and things. But what they can then do is they can take that anonymized data out. So once they get the tool out the other end, they swap the anonymized data for the real data, and then they can deploy it next week. Nothing, right? But just a little bit of productionization.
So Enrico says that's kind of crowdsourcing of your.
It is. It is. Yeah. It's all about crowdsource. It's all working together. So I'll give you an example. So health and safety apps, right? Every construction company needs a health and safety app. They've all got slightly different definitions in it. So if you want to pull that data together and see what the patterns are in health and safety, it's really difficult because they've all got different words and taxonomies and ontologies and all sorts of stuff. So it's really difficult to pull them all together. So why don't we just create one and give it away to everybody? So if you're a Sir Robert McAlpine, a big construction company, flow that all the way down through your supply chain and just give it away to, the plasterer who comes in, he's got one as well, right? So if you give it away to everybody and that all goes into the cloud and it's anonymized, we get all the patterns from that, and that stops people dying, right? So why don't we do that? That's a no-brainer, isn't it? Why don't we do that? And then on top of that, why don't we do productivity? Why don't we do carbon and net zero and da, 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 da? Why don't we do it? We don't do it because we don't do it.
I was just thinking, why does the NHS have so many competing solutions in different trusts? So,
Yeah.
when you could just have one.
Yeah. So this is right in your space as BCS people, right in your space, is that this is about apps and all the stuff in your space. Let's just crowdsource it all because it's not hard. Once you know what you're doing, creating this stuff is not difficult. So the app I talked about, which is the DCMA 14-point assessment, the chap who did it, his name's Kieran, big shout out to Kieran, well done. He tried to code it in Python and he was partway through the apprenticeship, right? He tried to code it in Python. I said, have you used the large language model, right? Have you used ChatGPT and Claude and that sort of stuff? He said, no. So he went in and he said, so help me with the DCMA 14-point assessment. So tell me what it is and break it down. So he broke it down to the 14 points. He said, can you write me some Python code for each of those 14 points? So he just broke it all down. And I got him 70% of the way there in about an hour. And then you had to refine the code and then link it up to other systems and then get a dashboard, etc. Which took him a bit longer. All right. There's a bloke who's an experienced guy in project controls. He wanted to move into the world of data. So what he did, he signed up to an apprenticeship. So as part of my business, I said I want to change the world about data-driven project delivery, but project people weren't interested because they do projects, they don't do data. The IT and the data team do data. They don't need to do data. And I said, well, you don't have an Excel team who do Excel. So why do we need to outsource this to another team? If you're doing projects, it's all about data, right? Your schedules data, your cost plans data, everything's data. We should be good at this stuff. And I couldn't get people interested, so I set up a course. Nobody would pay for it. So I then found out I can use some government money through the apprenticeship levies. So if I tweak the syllabus a little bit, it's free. So I set it up. And we've had hundreds of people through it. And they're now becoming the advocates and new jobs are coming out. So a chap called Alex Coles from CISC, a construction company, has got a brand new job. Head of data analytics for CISC. That job didn't exist before. It's been built around him because he's got a new set of skills. Right? And now he's starting to preempt where his variance going to come from on a project. What can he do to optimize carbon? What can he do to optimize the formwork and things like that? So on a construction site, you want to get optimum flow. If your team's deployed perfectly, then that's the best system you can have. And that's where they're trying to get to now. So it's all going to be data-driven. Right? So it's a new world order. It's a new world order, and we need to get ready for it. So I do a lot of these talks. I go around, Major Projects Association, government, various other things, and I talk about this stuff. And people say, yeah, it's great, Martin. I speak to them afterwards. I say, you up for it? No, I ain't got the time. I ain't got the time. And I say, yeah, but this talk is about adapt or become obsolete. That's it. So if you're a risk manager, and I spoke to an organization recently, got 200 risk managers, right? And I said, I don't think risk management is a thing, right? It's dead, right? It's dead.
But father risk managers? Yeah.
The thing about risk management, right? So a chap at Rolls-Royce, I said to him, so what's your job? He said, I'm the risk manager. I said, do you manage risk? He said, no, not really. I said, what do you do then? He said, I'm in charge of the risk management process. I said, cool, okay. So what do your risk managers do then? Well, they make sure the process is followed, right? Sellafield's got 40 risk managers, right? HS2's got God knows how many risk managers. So it's their job to go around, speak to all the project people and say, right, let's all sit down, get your Ouija boards out and guess what's going to go wrong. And when you've guessed, I'll write it down into a spreadsheet, make it look pretty with a heat map, and my job is done, right? That's what they do. Now they do more than that. They do QSRAs and all that sort of stuff, right? But that's basically a chunk of their work. I can automate that tomorrow because that's a workflow, right? So you take the conversations that they're having, stick it through a large language model, you get the minutes, they'll put it through another tool that then breaks it down into the risks. That all gets automated into a table. That's it, job done. And then that bot will chase you every 2 weeks and say, have you done your management actions, right? So that's the risk management job gone. Now, what can do that for you? But is that enough? No, it's not. Because with risk management is a human process of guessing what's going to go wrong. Yet, I've looked at 600 project variation notices for a major organisation, and only 20% of those variation notices came from risk. A load of others came from change control and logistics and just somebody was ill or whatever, right? They came from lots of other sources. But we use risk management as the basis for managing variance, but it comes from loads of places. That's all data feeds, right? All data feeds. So what we need is variance analysts who's preempting where this variance is going to come from. And we deploy probes then. So you can deploy a probe, you know, it might be a survey, it might be a camera, it might be whatever. We say, let me now start to predict where something's going to go off the rails. And if I've got an early signal of that, I can do something about it 6 months before than what I would have done before. So I can put the fire out when it's in at the ember, not when the building's burning down, which is where we are with some of these projects like HS2, right? So it means we can save the country an absolute fortune. But why don't we do it? We don't do it just because we don't do it. It's not because we can't do it, and not because we haven't got the will to do it. We just don't do it because we're all busy. We're all busy putting these fires out that we've lit. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah, I must confess that I spent a couple of years in charge of the risk management team for KPMG Consulting.
Right.
Probably does actually fit that model you're talking about, in fact.
Yeah, yeah. So I personally think that profession is a dead profession. It's like the typing pool, right? It's a dead profession. So how many risk managers have I got on this free course? I've got like 8. For me, it's a case of, right, dear risk manager, what is the risk of you not having a career and a job and being able to pay your mortgage in 2 years' time? I said, what's the risk of that then? So, oh, I don't know. I said, what? Is it 10%? Well, I don't know. I said, well, I think it's 90%. Well, I don't think it's 90%. Okay, what do you think it is then? 20%. Okay, let's go with that in 20%.
And Enrico online here has an interjection, which is a little bit long. I'll read it out. Projects are unique, personalities nuanced, project processes, techniques tailored. Project management is both science and art, yet data-driven decision-making is vital, but humans are complex. I don't know the extent to which you'd agree with all of those points.
So perfect, right? It's the definition of a project, it's a unique thing, right? Even if you do the same thing, it's unique because it's in time. You do something now, you do something in 6 months' time. The labour market's different, inflation's different, right? It's always a unique thing. But the product is unique, but at a functional level, it's not unique. So the way you're doing procurement, we do procurement. We can learn a lot of lessons from that. The way you're doing your sort of requirements engineering, the way you're doing your integration, systems engineering, and whatever, there's a lot of patterns in that we're not extracting. But we could do for next to nothing, right? So although the product is unique, the way we go about it is not. At a functional level, there's a lot of read across, and as well, it's not just inside of that sector, it's cross-sector. So that's why Rolls-Royce want to talk to the nuclear sector, right? So they do submarine reactors, but, you know, Sellafields are doing decommissioning, they're doing all sorts of stuff. AWE's building weapons, and there's loads of people doing nuclear. And you talk to places like the North Sea then, right, who's doing offshore energy and oil and gas, safety critical projects, right? Highly regulated safety critical projects. There's a lot of read across with highly regulated nuclear projects because the regulator's involved, right? So instead of looking at a product, then you're looking at the function. The function is regulator intervention with the work that you're doing. And if you get the patterns out of that, so I worked at Aldermaston at AWE. I had a big project there, $1 billion project.
Are you allowed to say that?
So I can say that, I can't say anything more than that.
You are these days, it's not so bad.
So it was a big project. And for me, there's a lot of patterns in that data about working with the regulator. Because the regulator is good. If they turn up and say, you've got to do it again, you've got to do it again. We had 20 projects on site, all done in silos because they're all sneaky beaky projects, all done in silos. There's loads of patterns in that data. We weren't leveraging it. It's bad. Then those same patterns in Sellafield, and the same patterns with Rolls-Royce, and the same patterns with the nuclear fleet that's been built for the sort of EDF reactors and things like that, right? And we're going to have small modular reactors. It's the same patterns time and time again. And Hinkley's gone massively over budget. Well, that was foreseeable because we had things like sort of Olkiluoto in Finland, another reactor, at Flamanville, that's another reactor. They've all gone pear-shaped, all of them. Right? There's patterns in that data that we're not leveraging.
Are you allowed to say that as well?
That's all in the public domain.
Okay.
All that's in the public domain. Yeah. What do you think?
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's insane, isn't it? Absolutely insane that we're not leveraging all of this because it's all for society's benefit. We're burning money, just falling down the same holes time and time again.
It's the everybody, somebody, and nobody syndrome. And that's the problem.
Spell that out for us a bit better.
Well, everybody thinks somebody's doing it, somebody thinks everybody's doing it, and in the end, nobody does it. And it's nobody's ticket. It's nobody's critical mission statement. So, not me, mate. Joe, our big boy over there, it's him. And so nobody does it. And I've had that in all my career. It's exactly the same thing. It's like, well, we'll go, well, I know that we've got this problem. I mean, we had a big program where we were offshoring. And I put in some quality processes to check things along the way. Nobody else did. So there was lots of strands. And so I said, this isn't right. And I was told, you're too picky, you're too difficult. So in the end, when they got to system testing, it imploded because they hadn't been doing what they said they were doing. They hadn't got in what they said they were doing. They got a workbench. Now that was wonderful for what it did, but it meant you couldn't rely on it. You had to start the next process from scratch because that wasn't a reliable base. And we didn't find that out till there, even though I'd been telling people there's a problem here. Nobody wanted to know. And suddenly it's like whole program. And that's
like
the
assurance as well, right?
Yeah.
So assurance for me, so people talk about assurance and they talk about project controls, whatever. So project controls for me, if you're in charge of the resources, you are controlling the project, right? If you're not in charge of the resources, they still call it project controls, but it's not. It's an assurance function because you're making sure that what they're doing is right.
Yeah.
And there's lots of project controllers on big money, right, six-figure numbers, controlling projects that they're not because somebody else is in charge of the resources. So it's an assurance function. Now, if I'm assuring somebody else's schedule, cost plan, you know, whatever, I can do that with a bot. I just need to train the bot how to do it. And it's looking at stuff 24/7. I don't need to send somebody out and check somebody else's work. I can do it with a computer, just like that. So if you think about government, when I worked in MOD, most of my job was making sure taxpayers' money was well spent, right? Now, if that's my job, that's largely an insurance function. That's not called assurance. They say they're doing project management and things like that. But I wasn't necessarily doing project management. I was doing procurement managing, overseeing somebody else doing up the engineering and making airplanes and things like that. I would say today, looking back, I can do 70% of my old job with a computer. Right? So what those people should be doing now, I could save government a load of money by saying, right, let's get rid of all those jobs because we don't need them anymore because a computer can do it. Well, that's a bad thing for society because these projects are all overrunning, right? So let's take that saving, train those people up, stick them up the value chain so they're laying the track in front of the train, right? They're making it go faster. They're predicting what's going to go wrong. So instead of trying to save a few £100 by losing some heads, try and save a few tens of millions, if not billions, by delivering projects better. Yeah? It's not a head count issue. But if we don't get people up the value chain, we'll never deliver it. And you can bring in, so an example is at the hackathon, right? So there's a wonderful lady from Loughborough University called Professor Georgina Cosma. She got 4 PhD people to come along to the hack. So just down the road in Derby. So they came along to the hack and I thought, oh, they're going to clean up, right? These are people doing artificial intelligence and data. They're just going to clean up. And they didn't. And they didn't because they didn't understand the domain. They got straight into the data, into some data that was not very good, draw some conclusions that couldn't be made from that data. Right? So they did some really wheezy stuff with the technology, but they lost sight of the business problem. Right? And that's what project professionals are really good at, is you understand your domain, you understand the data, you understand where it's come from, whatever. So if you've got the data skills on top of that, bingo. Right? So you might need a subject matter expert who's got a PhD, who's going to do some really clever optimization work, but you don't need a gaggle of them. No.
Martin, a short while ago, you were talking about working in silos. Kat has a comment. And Kat, if you want to turn your mic on and explore your question with Martin, please do. We'd love to hear from some of the online people as well as people in the room. Kat says, working in silos is a culture. A view says it creates a firewall from whistleblowers. It's a rather interesting observation. Kat, do you want to say more?
Sure. So I did some work at BAE, and I challenged up the chain, and I was told, take your things, go home. So I went across the silos. I'm very much of your thinking, Martin. Let's get together. What can we do all together? Share our data. But there's a view, certainly within defence and in other organisations, that you must have a break and a block between departments so that they don't bleed into each other and they don't share too much information so that the execs don't lose control. Over to you.
So I think some of that is necessary, right? So it's about need to know. So if it's sensitive information, then you don't need to know, right? Well, that tends to be about weapon performance or platform sort of performance. So what's the penetration of a weapon, right? We don't need to know that as project professionals, because that is down to the technologists and the engineers to sort that out. We're more looking at the cost plans and the schedules and the integration and all that sort of stuff, which is less sensitive. So when people say to me, oh, you can't have this data, it's really sensitive, I say, I know it is. It's in the public interest that we pull all that data securely so we can leverage it, right? So a lady called Caroline Boughton is the head of project delivery for the MOD. She sits on the task force, right? So she is keen to get involved in this and help to make it happen. So through the apprenticeship that I've talked about, so far they've put 100 project professionals through the apprenticeship, and there's budget to put another 150 through. And then the contract will get renewed and they'll put more people through. I spoke to a senior guy this morning who was responsible for a capability in MOD. So he's the senior responsible owner. And he said, I really get this. It sounds sensible to me. I need to speak to my supplier. And I said, well, I've already spoken to supplier and they're too busy. They're too busy putting out fires. He said, what's the recommendation? I said, we're going to speak to the talisman who's on the task force because he's all over it. It's a personality thing. So go and have a chat with him. He will fire everybody else up and get a flywheel going. Right? You need to trigger the flywheel. It's about a culture. So what we can do then is say for that capability, can we work with the primes, right? A couple of primes and then their supply chain, whatever. If you can put those people together through some closed cohorts of the apprenticeship, when they're working on projects together, they can say, right, I'm going to break down all these firewalls, all these boundaries, because we're going to work together to solve a problem that affects both of us. So you then have end-to-end data pipelines, apps, systems in place. So you don't have to have people who's checking people who's checking people who's checking people anymore, right? You get rid of it because you get them collaborating as a free byproduct of a free course. So why wouldn't you do that? So he said, what do I need to do to make it happen? So I sent him some emails this morning, and he's now starting to make it happen. And BA Systems have written to me today as well. And they said, so I've been talking to them for about 4 or 5 years, something like that. But because they've seen what Rolls-Royce are doing, they've seen the opportunity. David Belshaw is a chap from Rolls-Royce, published something in the APM quarterly magazine this month, which is really inspiring stuff. He's fired people up. That's created a bit of FOMO. And now BA Systems are getting in on that, right? So they're now saying, I want to be involved in the coalition and I want to go for it. So it's this flywheel, just getting the flywheel going, right? It starts to suck in more and more effort and more advocates and more people. And then they get it. We demonstrate return on investment is that this is going to move the dial, and it goes faster. It goes faster. Where I want to be by the end of 2026 is a 1,000-person hackathon at a massive football stadium, and we'll inspire loads of people, get students along, and PhDs and project people and data people, get them all together, and some magic will happen.
That sounds rather hard to pull that number of different thoughts together into a single result.
So it's not a single result. What you finish up with through a hackathon, and this is where we got it wrong in the early days, right? Because we were trying to solve a problem, right? Let's take this data here, pick the bones out of it, and give me a solution. So we've changed the approach now and said, let's get the component parts. So if you can solve a component part, we can pick all those parts up. It's like Lego, right? We've got loads of Lego pieces now. You can take those Lego pieces away and join them together as you want. And some people join those together into an app. And some will join them together into a system which has got an app and a dashboard and something else. And somebody else will say, right, I need data validation in there. And that's another few Lego pieces, right? It's all modular. And all of this stuff is easy to do because there's so much open source out there, right? Python scripts. And people say, oh, I've got to go and code in Python. It's like, no, you don't. Just get a chat GPT, it'll write the code for you, and then say, it's going to pull down an algorithm. And these algorithms, like an optimization algorithm, something about a hospital, it's got so many beds, got so many operating theatres, there's bed blockers because they can't get them out into social care, got so many doctors, so many nurses, whatever, right? That's a multi-factor optimization problem. There's an algorithm that will solve that for you, that a PhD did ages ago. It's available in a Python library for nothing. All you've got to do is call it down, put the variables in, and it spits an answer out for you. It's as easy as that. Why don't we do that? Right? We do that today for nothing.
Anyone else got some observations for us?
So how do you select people to go on the hackathons then? Is that a first come, first served? Or?
First come, first served. So the Rolls-Royce one was sold out. Now the next one's going to be sold out because it's Oracle and it's not that big a space. I think we can only get 100 in it. So we did do one at the Spurs ground a couple of years ago. That was 330 people we got along to that, so that was good. And we've been to Man City ground as well, etc. So it's first come, first served. If they're on their apprenticeship, they're getting for nothing. If they're not on their apprenticeship, we charge them 30 quid. And if you're a student, you get it for 15 quid. And why do we charge them 30 quid? Because we don't charge anything. We get 1,000 people who say they come in, and we get 20 people who turn up, and we've got to put a skip full of food in the bin, right? That costs us a fortune. So that 30 quid we take just so there's an emotional investment in them coming along, and give all that 30 quid to charity. And we've raised over 15 grand now for charities through the hackathons. It's pretty cool. So that's the only thing that people pay for. The APM sponsors it, the Major Projects Association sponsors it. BCS would be welcome to come along and join the party. I'll bring your problems along. It's about the power of community all working together.
So you don't have to be young.
So one of the guys, a chap called Ken from Suburban Calpine, he's 60 plus, and he's been on the apprenticeship and he's passed it. It's a state of mind, right? I'm 56, right? This is a state of mind. You need young people. State of mind. If you don't think you can do it, you can't do it. Right? You've got to be open to it. Go for it.
I think my brain has slowed down a bit since the days when I was doing hackathons kind of stuff.
So I found personally, so I tried to learn this graph database called Neo4j. There's a programming language called Cypher, right? So they did a training course, it's half a day training course, a free thing. You went along to it. So I went along to my laptop. All right, here we go. And I've got this child next to me. They did look very young, sort of very old at all. I like it. You know, I didn't ask him how old he was, but he was clearly very young. And it's like, right, start here and start there. And this chap was already on page 7. And I was just going through the right. What do we do here? What do we do? And at that point, I realised I'm not built for coding, right? There's other people who's a lot faster at it and really get it like that. But what I am good at is connect all the dots, right? So that's got a name. So McKinsey calls it a translator role. So you speak to data people, you speak to the project people, speak to the IT people, whatever, you join it all together and try and fix stuff. So I can't do all this stuff. Well, large language models will do a lot of things with that and etc. But in terms of coding in Python and Cypher, I've got some real ninjas in my team who could do that. 3 PhDs in my team who can do this stuff in the sleep, right? I've learned it's not my gift. And it's the same for all of you, right? So some people are like dashboards, someone like automation, someone like the translator role, someone like the practitioner role, someone like the data engineering, the back end stuff, someone like the data science, optimizing all the algorithms, someone like the data analyst role where you're trying to pull the data out of different corporate systems and developing apps or whatever.
Just reminded me of a diagram I remember from the past, which was trying to encapsulate how all of that process works. And it had a box in the middle that says, then a miracle happens.
I remember that.
Yeah. So graph databases as well. So what you can do with the graph database is a lot more organic. Right? So we can keep building this out and building this out and building this out. So what we're now doing is creating this concept of a project brain, right? So back to risk management. We don't do risk management to manage risk, right? What we should be doing is minimizing the downside and maximizing the upside. That's what we're trying to do. That's not risk management. It's lots of things, right? Change control fits in that box, right? So if you can preempt change control and do it better, you get less downside and more upside, right? So if you view it through that lens, we're trying to minimize the downside and maximize the upside, you probably come up with a different set of systems. So one of the manifesto principles is we're going to bust myths. So all the stuff in the body of knowledge, we started out say, we think it's wrong, right? We think there's a better approach. It's a better approach to risk management, better approach to assurance, better approach to change control. So a lot of things we've been taught over the years, we're now trying to start say, I don't think that's right. Let's revisit it. So if we can do that, and we can start to reimagine some of these things, like minimizing the downside, maximize the upside. If you break that down, so just imagine that's the trunk of a tree, and you break it down to the twig ends, so all the branches just through sort of requirements decomposition, those are the problems that we need to solve as project professionals, so we can get really good at minimizing the downside and maximizing the upside. Yeah. If we can resolve those problems at a twig end, through these little jigsaw pieces I've been talking about, through hackathons, through apprenticeship projects, we will solve project delivery in a systematic systems engineering type approach through the power of the crowd for next to nothing.
Enrico online has a fairly specific question. Enrico, do you want to explain your question? Because it's a little bit long. I'll read it out if you prefer.
It's better for you to read it out, Simon. Thank you.
Okay, so Enrico says there are standard frameworks for project data, i.e. ISO 19650. Everyone's familiar with that one, I trust.
Yeah, last night, yeah.
And then it says BIM. Is the Project Data Analytics Coalition working on a standard framework that would work for any kind of project? So is an ambition to have a standard framework for data.
So
analytics data.
BIM, right? It's all about building information modeling, right? So there was a humongous amount of government money went into this thing called a Centre for Digital built Britain. So I think they got 25 million, something like that. A chunk of that went to Cambridge University, and they set up this thing about digital twins and BMX and ontologies for the built environment. And what they're trying to do is to create digital twins of all this infrastructure we've got. So you can look at your power requirements, you can integrate it all. So in 20 years' time, it all flows and it's got resilience and all sorts of stuff, right? Great ambition. And that is for the built environment. It's not for building the environment, right? And I argued for years and years and years, and I said, that is about the built environment. Now, what you can do, if you're building this building here, you've probably got a CAD model that is part of that BIM specification, right? Now, that'll tell you this is made out of a certain material, the floor's made out of a certain material, there's a certain power requirement in here, there's a certain air conditioning requirement, etc., and a heat load. And so each of those have got codifications that go with it, like AFC codes and various things. And that is for the built environment. So what you can do through the model, you can fast forward it and rewind it so you can see the building being built, right? So that gets into something called 4D BIM, 5D BIM. So it's now looking at the time series of the building being built bit by bit, right? So you can now use that for building the environment. You can understand your carbon load as well, so that might be 6D BIM. You've got your cost model that goes over the top, that's a 7D BIM, right? So it's more and more of these dimensions to build information modeling. Now, what that's doing is just taking what we've got today and codifying it. What I'm arguing is what we've got today is not the right approach. So where does risk fit in with that lot, right? And risk fits in. So as part of the BIM models, there's a bit on risk, but it's old school risk thinking, right? We're just codifying what we've had for 50 years, and that's not the right approach. So we've got to get back to how do we minimize the downside, how do we sort of maximize the upside and versions of that, right? So we break that problem down, it's no longer a standard, right? And I really don't like some of these British standards because they're flat, right? It's a piece of paper. These standards are bits of paper. This is a multi-dimensional model, right? So if you think about a graph database, it's a bit like Facebook. It's the way that you're connected in here. You're all connected through BCS, but some of you might live close to each other. You might like the same football team and you bought the same Christmas present or whatever, right? You've got connections in this room. That's not a flat, a piece of paper model. That's a three-dimensional model, right? That's what we need in project delivery. And it won't sit in a standard. It's the wrong vehicle for it. It's a three-dimensional model, which is an ontology-based model. And you link it back to the problem. And then just imagine, right, you've got this 3D model, and then I can overlay that with Sir Robert McAlpine's data. And I can overlay it with Mesa's data. And I can overlay it with Balfour Beatty's data, right? They won't share their data, but if they can put it into a model through the concept of a data trust, where they can overlay it, and it's all anonymized insights coming out of it, they can all pull the insights that come out of it, because you've now got an ecosystem. So the brain sets up the framework to answer all these problems, and the data trust is the vehicle to pull all the data so you can answer what your problem in due course. And it's an optimization problem. Everybody wins out of it. Why won't you do it? So we've created this thing called a construction data trust. And Grant Finlay, a big shout out to him, he's the chair of it, right? And he is the managing director for Sir Robert McAlpine, right? So he chairs this vehicle, which is to pull data for the greater good. Now, it's almost impossible to get data out of people because we're all too busy. At HS2, there's no budget for this, right? There's a budget to build a railway, and there's a small amount of money for this learning legacy. The learning legacy is reports on lessons learned, things like that. There's no budget to take all of that data that is an exhaust plume off that and do something with it. Because it's not the job of HS2 to do that. It's probably the Department for Transport. So when they're shaving the money because it's gone massively over budget, that's something that goes in the bin, right? It's taken as a savings measure. So we'll never fix this unless there's a mind shift. So I hope that's answered the question about BIM in a roundabout way.
I don't know, Enrico, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. That was very insightful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
I do expect everybody to be thinking of some really good questions to ask Martin. I want to come in with one that really interests me though, because we've been talking about AI and data and algorithms and processes. And I think to myself, so where are the people in all of this? Where are the soft skills you need? Where are the people skills? How do you engage your team? Management by walking about with a very popular technique in the past, at least. How do you deal with sponsors? How do you deal with those relationships with other people in this world, which is all sort of automated and data? So,
Yeah. So, I think it was 3 weeks ago, there was Microsoft Ignite, right? So it's their annual session. And they said, right, we're going to sort of announce some really cool stuff. So they announced a project management agent, right? So people have been saying to me exactly that. Well, we're not going to lose project managers because.
so it said, hi, I'm your project manager. How are you today?
Yeah. So these project management agents, they said, you can't get a project management agent to manage all the soft skills, right? So project management jobs will never go because it's about managing teams and people. And I said, hang on a minute, right? That's arguing that nothing needs to change, right? So what I'm saying is, if you work on HS2 and there's 2,000 project managers, you ain't going to need 2,000 project managers in the future, right? Because you've got to separate roles and tasks, right? Some of these tasks will get automated without doubt, without doubt. So that means you need less human resources to do the same number of tasks, right? Now, what does that mean for all the soft skills, right? What it means is you can do it much, much better. So if I'm communicating with all my stakeholders, right, I'm really busy and I'm going to send them a project update, right? If I send that project update out, I'm really busy, I'll just send it out and they'll all get the same one. If I've done my data analytics, I know the likes, the dislikes, I know if they're advocates or whatever, I can then put it through ChatGPT and it then emphasizes the bits in that communication which is important to them. So I've now got this thing called an audience of one, right? So I can do stakeholder management 1 billion times better than what I could do before, right?
Absolutely.
So I've got an audience of,
Because less is more.
yeah. And as well, because I've got all the data and stuff, I can give them what they're interested in, not all the fluff around the outside that everybody else is interested in, but they're not.
Which is why they don't read it half the time.
Yeah.
Because there's too much to read. It's not directly applicable.
Yeah. And I won't even have that in the future because they'll just dial into a system like a large language model and talk to it and say, so tell me what's going on, tell me this, that, and the other. I've trained that for that persona. I know what they're allowed to see and what they're not allowed to see because in a graph database, I can get role-based permissions at a cell level, node level. It means then they can interact with it all day long and ask them whatever. They get a progress update, whatever. Everybody's got real-time data on it. Now, what this stops is, so I've worked on a lot of projects, when the data goes up the chain, it gets manipulated.
I perish the thought.
You should stop that because we've now got real-time data and everybody's got a version of it because it's cut in different ways. It's not manipulated, it's just cut in different ways. And that requires a cultural change. I talked to 2 big clients today and I said, if you insist on your supply chain giving you all this data, and as soon as you get that data, so one of your teams says, I've got them, profiteering, I knew it. That's it, the shutters will come down straight away and you'll ruin it.
Well, Paula has asked a related question there, which I think is actually more loaded than it sounds, which is, how do you assure people that their data is truly anonymous and will be used for the greater good? And what she's not saying there is, how do you make sure it's not going to be used against you personally when you contribute your data?
So with the data trust, so we are the data steward, right? So the construction data trust has employed my company projected success to run the data trust on their behalf, right? So we do all the data engineering and manage it for them. So the The managing director of Civil McAlpine can't see what's in the data trust, he's not allowed to. Right? So we've got a board, and the board has got Masel on it. I did have the IPO in it as well, the Infrastructure Projects Authority and some others, right? So the board is a representation of the data providers. So the data providers, the board sets the rules, right? And it's the data steward's job to execute the rules. So you don't anonymize the data in the data trust, right? You put the data in as raw as you can get it. And then what you can do is saying, right, I want to train up a certain model. So that model gets trained on that data and goes back trained up. But the human being doesn't see the data. It's just a trained model. That's called federated learning, right? So you send something out, it learns. And that's the way some of your models work on your phone as well. Apple's doing that at the moment, right? So it's learning from your data, but they can't get all your data, right? So there's models that's doing that. So it's not just about anonymizing the data, it's using the data in smart ways. And some of the data you're not bothered about, some of it's super sensitive. So you aggregate the data as well. So when you aggregate the data, it becomes less sensitive. You've got to make sure there's minimum quantities. So for some data, you've got to make sure there's at least 5 projects worth, because you reverse engineer it otherwise. So there's loads of methods, and we worked them all out. We've done stuff in the oil and gas sector as well. So we set up a data trust for the North Sea. It's £45 billion worth of decommissioning projects in the North Sea. I don't know if you know, but you've got to pay half of that. So taxpayers are going to pay half of that bill. And the other half of the bill can be offset against tax for the operators. And don't forget, if they're drilling in the North Sea, they're paying 70% tax. So we pay a chunk of that as well, because that can be offset. So we're probably picking up 70–80% of that bill, of that £45 billion worth of decommissioning. 4,000 wells. Just imagine we can pool all that data for the greater good. So we've been doing the data steward job on that as well. Now that's not going so well. That's because everyone's too busy. There's no incentive to do it. So we set up the vehicle to do it all. We can make it all happen, but there's no common thread for people to work together. And you think with the operators, this is all a liability for them as well, so they want to get the cost down, but they're all too busy.
You'll be pleased to know that Karim has endorsed what you were saying about the people issues. So he says too many PMs are too busy with those should be automated tasks that they do not have time to do the stakeholder management and team management activities they should be doing. So he's definitely with you on that one.
So in terms of the team stuff as well, right, there's a brilliant chap in Australia called Kelvin McGrath. Love him. Right, he's done some brilliant stuff. And he's got a company called Meeting Quality. So Google it, and he's got some capabilities. One of his capabilities is every week he's going to send you a little questionnaire. It takes you 45 seconds to fill it in. So some questions with some slider bars. Do you agree, not agree, or you're neutral on it, right? So he takes all that. Now this is wisdom of the crowd type stuff, right? So he keeps sampling and sampling and sampling and sampling. And then you pick up this picture of the wisdom of the crowd. And now we can work out. So he showed me some of these charts, and they're brilliant. And he came along to one of my meetups in London about 2019. And he said, what's happening with this data set here? And basically morale was dropping and dropping and dropping, and people working longer hours. And then suddenly the morale went up. He said, what's going on here, Martin? And I said, I don't know. You know, why would the morale go up? Have they changed the leader or something? He said, no. They recognised that the project's undeliverable. So they've all just like given in. Now that wasn't obvious through any of your risk registers and whatever. It was obvious through your soft data, right? And what the project manager doing is the project directors is still whipping them. Right? Work harder, work harder, work harder. But they've given in. Well, they didn't realise that. But it was clear from the data, from sense making, from the wisdom of the crowd. Something else he said was, the project directors think the project's all going well, we're going to deliver it on this day, etc., etc. The project team saying you ain't got a dog in house chance. So you've got divergence. If you've got divergence to that extent, what's your team? Right. So you then probably need to flip out your senior leaders and bring some other people in. It's a turnaround job on it, right? It's evidenced. It's not conjecture, it's evidenced. So when people say to me, oh, you need humans to do the softer issues, computers can do some of those things better than we can do it. So it's augmenting us, it's not replacing us. Yeah. That's enabling us to manage all that stuff much better than we could have done before. And humans aren't perfect, we're all biased. Right? So you've got recency bias, optimism bias. There's 188 different biases, right? Gambler's fallacy, that sort of stuff where you think, you know, I made a mess of it before, but this time's different. It's not, right? It's not. So that data's saying you're about to go down the same path again and fall down the same holes. Don't.
Certainly optimism bias is the single biggest issue, I think, in project management. So
Yeah.
everything assumes that things will work out perfectly.
Yeah.
No roadblocks.
So what we did with Baker Hughes as well. So this was hack 6. So Baker Hughes. So one of their chaps is called Pedro. He was on the apprenticeship, a senior guy. So he was senior project controls, project manager. So I'd estimate he's on a 6-figure salary, that sort of thing, right? So senior guy. And he said, I've got loads of schedules here in mind. So he does the Christmas trees, which sit underneath an old well, right? And those Christmas trees, basically underneath the well, I mean, underneath the rig, you've got all these wells that scatter around, right? And some of them might be 20 kilometers away. It's a massive umbilical cord up to that rig. So the Christmas tree is the integration of all of those umbilical cords, right? Up to the rig. So they've been manufacturing these Christmas trees and they're doing for lots of different organizations. And he said, we've got loads and loads of these, Martin. I've been plowing through them and it's really hard work. I'm trying to work out for a work package, is the estimate correct? Right. So he said, so this work package here, it took 15 days. Right. So what should the estimate be the next time we do it? Right. And said as well, which of these are more likely to go pear-shaped, right? So not necessarily normal distribution, it'll be a real fat tail distribution. So it goes out a long, long way, right? So it get really bad. You know, the probability to get going really well is a lot less than the probability of it going really, really bad, a fat tail distribution, right? So if you take all that data, you're trying to think, well, so the first problem is my estimate correct in the first place for a work package? And secondly, what is its predisposition to variance? So is it likely to go pear-shaped? We've been working on this for ages. He brought it to a hackathon and the team solved that in 2 days. Right? So that's bias, right? A really good book from Daniel Kahneman, which is called Noise. So if you think about, first of all, is that should that be 15 days or should it be 10 days, whatever, right? So if you've got a 10-day estimate, and it's consistently turning around a mean of around 15 days, then it's bias, right? You've got optimism bias there, add 5 days on, right? So that's your bias component. And you can identify that in your data. And then you look at the scatter around that 15 days. Is it closely correlated, in which case you're nailing it 15 days every time, or is some 12, some 24, whatever, right? So what's the distribution on that? And that's your noise. So you can identify noise and bias from your data. So you can take out the bias straight away by changing your estimate. And then the really noisy things, the things you should be intervening on, because those are the things that's going to trip you up. Something's consistently 15 days, just leave it your team to manage, right? It doesn't need any supervision because they can do it consistently with their eyes shut.
Those outliers, though, can be very worrying, even if they're unlikely and unusual.
Yeah. So it's the low probability impact events. And that, so Bent Fluvier, who was one of the project management ninjas at Oxford University, so it's a public accounts committee, he's the person who turns up, professor. He wrote a paper, I think it was 2011, about 1,600 IT projects. And said that 1 in 6 projects goes really pear-shaped, and he called them black swans. Now, black swan, and that's in Taleb's book, is a black swan is this thing which is an unpredictable, unforeseeable event that you can only rationalize through hindsight. All right? So he said 1 in 6 are black swan events. Don't forget, I've got 20,000 lessons learned and I've read loads of NAO reports whenever. And when I've read these NAO reports, I thought, oh, that's obvious, and that's obvious, and this is obvious, and that's obvious. Why wouldn't you do that? And it's because of system, right? The politicians have put pressure on somebody, and we've ignored this because we had to go fast. And it's all foreseeable. So I don't accept that 1 in 6 projects from this sample of 1,500, 600 or something is a black swan. I just don't. And I called him out on it. And I said, I don't accept your analysis. I don't think it's right. Because that's saying 1 in 6 is an act of God. It just popped out. That's not right. You know, it should be a very small percentage.
I think Enrico has been exploring some of these things on Google by the look of it. Is the Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable, is a 2007 book by Nassim Nicholas Tale. And I mentioned that Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment, is a non-fiction book by Professors Daniel Kahneman, Olivier Sibony and Cass Einstein, published in May 18th, 2021. He's good at facts.
So both of them are business books. I don't think Black Swan's fiction. I think it's more of a management book. Those Kahneman books more of a research. You know. So sadly the bloke died last year, but he's done some really cracking stuff. He got a Nobel Prize for some of the stuff he did.
I think there's a problem with allowing for those things which are way off the end of the normal distribution, which I best illustrate by when I go to visit my in-laws in America, because I'm worried quite reasonably that the trains might be running late. So I'll go for a train that's a train earlier than I need to catch a flight that will get me in well safe for the bus connection I need, because that bus has to connect with a ferry to get to my end destination. So by the time I've gone a train early, and a flight early, and then a bus early, and then a ferry early, the whole process is like 3 times as long as it needed to be.
Yeah. So if I could say to you though, right, this is the distribution. So from those flights and the buses and whatever, those ferries, they are Swedish ferries, they're always bang on time, right? If I could tell you that, you think, right, okay, I'm going to change my decision making about that. And then if I could say, yeah, but just a minute, in summer, they go like clockwork, and in winter, they're going to be affected by a hurricane or gales or ice or whatever. So you get more noise, right? You get more variation around it. You can make informed decisions then, and you probably put all of that into ChatGPT and say, I want 95% probability of being able to get to my journey by this time. What time do I need to leave?
95% probability means that at least 5 times in my life I would have had to sleep at the ferry terminals for the next day when the ferries start again.
Yeah, but some of that, right? So my brother, he lives in Austin, Texas, and he was in Germany on 9/11, right? And 9/11, they closed the skies. You know, that's not in your data set. You can't. That's a black swan, that, right?
Yes, that is. Yeah.
I feel more comfortable at 99% than 95%, I think.
Yeah, and that's a judgment call, isn't it? Well, that's the risk that we personally prepare to take. It's about your risk appetite.
Would you be happier in the summer or the winter? You know, you wouldn't want it in the winter, definitely. So, but maybe in the summer you go. Yeah.
So just to increase your thresholds, and you can put that through ChatGPT, right? You could take all that data set, stick it into a large language model, and say, what time do I need to set off? I don't know if you saw Google last night, but they've got a new piece of kit out, which will now go and query all the websites for you and book all your flights for you and your buses and whatever. Query all the timetables from that and do it all for you. And so that problem you've got,
and does that
solve it for you now?
But does that build in the contingency levels that you would look for?
If you set
Or
it up
does
in
it
your
assume
training,
that they all go according to plan?
so if you take all the flights, which I'm sure there's database out there about flight delays, all that sort of stuff. You take all of that, take the weather conditions, because that's all in the data set, and just smash it all together with the right data model. You need to train the data, supervised learning, and you can work out. Now, somebody's going to solve this problem. If it's not already solved, it is now solvable. Right? So we'll say to you, so where do you want to get to? This is the time self. These are all the connections. And if that connection doesn't work, then do this one and there's an alternative.
We've got time for just a few more questions or thoughts or observations. Delighted to hear any more questions from you.
I'm very happy to be challenged as well, right? So if you think we're talking rubbish, please challenge me because I love that, right? I love a bit of intellectual sparring. I love it.
I see Kat's got a hand up there. Kat, go in.
Yes, thank you. I've got two things really, Martin. What I'm hearing is I think we're at a place now, correct me if I'm wrong, where it's Star Trek. I can go to the computer and say, I've got this project, I've got this program, I've got this portfolio, build me it. And then I'll give you some more information in a minute when you've given me the framework. It seems to me that we are already there. And if that's the case, then my second question is, I've been to a couple of interviews. I'm looking for a job at the moment, and the people don't understand what a PMO is. Even though you've got a PMO manager in the room, he has spent the last 3 years battling to get people to do risk management. Now he's gone and he's got the risk management. And, so you've got a thing around people don't understand what PMO is. And so we're in a computer event this evening. Do you see this as a computer techie driven thing to come to you, or is it people like me who's got a project management program portfolio background that have to step into the computer? How are you going to raise our awareness to bring these two things together? Because I sit in IT, I sit in project, it's like that at the moment.
So DEFRA said, a chap called Andrew Cleary is running project data analytics for DEFRA. He said, what I'm going to do is set up my team, right? Build an empire around project data analytics. I say, right, so you have all these people who's going to do all the cool stuff on data. What happens to all your project people? You've automated this, you've automated that, you've automated something else, you've automated something. What's going to happen to them all, right? So you're building up the organisation with these really expensive people. You've got to get rid of all your project people, right? Why don't we train the project people up and keep a small centre of excellence with your ninjas in it who can help them out on top-end Python and top-end large language models and data engineering and things like that, right? It's about federating this. And that's what Microsoft's all about, right? It's low code, drag and drop. It's low code, we could all do it. Why don't we do it? And that's why I set the apprenticeship up, right? So the academy is there to train people on this stuff for nothing, because government picks up the bill. So for me, I'm a firm believer is we should not leave this to data people to do, right? And I'm not advocating that we don't have data people. I'm saying it's hub and spoke, right? You have a very small centre of excellence and you federate this. We do not have Excel teams. We don't have Word teams anymore because it used to be called a typing pool.
Yes.
Right? We don't have it.
I have one interjection about the Excel team, though, which is a few years back, Pricewaterhouse published a survey that showed that 50% of Excel spreadsheets relied upon in business had fundamental flaws, mistakes in them. Whether I would trust the average person to get an Excel spreadsheet right, I'm a 50% confidence level.
So with Copilot, now you can say, go and find the errors in the spreadsheet. Right. So it'll now start to find the errors for you and it'll do adversarial work on it, right? So you get one agent to do something and get another agent, so one Claude, one ChatGPT, and get them to check each other's work. You do that today. So it is Star Trek, right? It's Star Trek, but it's not, this is not future gazing. This is all available today. It's just we've not done it. We've not done it because we're too busy.
Was it the space shuttle that had 5 different computers? And they could actually vote against each other. So if there was a disagreement and 3 said one thing and 2 said the other, then the 3 wins.
Yeah.
We've done that on a number of things. Otherwise, you can't rely on it. Right? The simple basic thing is time. Do these all agree? No. Okay. something's wrong, you take the majority.
I totally agree with what you're saying, that there's a cultural mindset change to have in project management to analyze data and level it up. There's also, if you look at project management tools, it's still in the infancy. There's still some limitations and capability of AI tools within things like Smartsheets, Monday.com, and all of that we use, to draw. And therefore, you're playing with AI to try to elevate your dashboard, for example, but you can't, because the functionality is just not quite there. So you have to build the functions or the formulas yourself.
Yeah. So that's what I'm advocating, right? Is that don't go and buy these bits of software, right? Use the Microsoft stack, which is plug and play. And what we'll do to the community is we'll configure it. So a dashboard is not go out and buy a special dashboard. It's taking Power BI and configuring it and putting a data model behind it and certain DAX formulas and other data pipelines, whatever. If somebody's done that once, you pick that up as a module, tweak it. So it's going to be in a GitHub repo, so you go and download it and do what you want with it. And then there'll be another component, another component, another component, and you go and plug them together as you want to plug them together, right? So you become a systems integrator then, solving the problems of your business. And I reckon that is a really cool job, right? That's a really, really cool job. And that needs a project person, not a data person, because you understand the problems you're trying to solve. And this is BCS land, right? You're not pouring concrete here. This is what you do for a living, right? You should be all over it.
Well, we're just about out of time. We've got just about 3 minutes left. I thought maybe we give you the opportunity just to explain where they can discover more about you, because you've written some books and you're...
So our website's not as good as it should be. It's just been refreshed. It should be out end of January. But go and check out the Projecting Success website. So projectingsuccess.co.uk. Find me on LinkedIn. I put a load of stuff out. Try and keep people plugged in with what's going on. The books are on there as well. So go to the blog and you'll see some of the books in there. The books aren't obvious as they should be, right? I've had a chat with my team, but they are going to fix it. Right, we're going to have a new website soon. Get involved in the apprenticeship, right? It's for me, it's a no-brainer. Government is going to pay for you to get trained up and be wizards in this stuff, right? If you're really good at this and you can predict what's going to go wrong in a project, that's a lot better than munging out really PowerPoint reports, right? Which is what a lot of people's been doing for decades.
So how do they do that if they're going to bite on that opportunity?
So Projected Success, just go to our inquiries, send us an email. A chap called Nick Wall will be in touch and he will welcome you with open arms and fire you up for this brand new future. And tell all your mates about it as well, right? It's free. It's not entirely free, right? So it's free for big organisations. If you work in a very small organisation, the government will pay 95% of the bill. And there's some rules as well. So if you've not lived in the EU for the last 3 years, then there's some eligibility criteria. So government rules, because it's government funded at the end of the day.
Kat has shared, is it nick.wall at Randstad?
No, that's not the one. It's Projecting Success.
That's different one, sorry, Kat.
So Nick W, NIKW at projectingsuccess.co.uk.
Okay, well, I think we should wrap things up. Thank you very much for everything.